What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is Lord Smash Garage here. Today we're going to be doing the rear calipers and rotors on a 2017 Ford Transit 150 base. To get things started off, what you're going to need are 17 for your bracket bolts. You're going to need a 15. You're going to need a 15 for your mounting bolts. You also need a 13 and a 14, possibly, depending on the bolts that come with the new calipers to connect. So the reason for this job is this guy right here has a seized up caliper, so it's blowing through pads and rotors. So we're going to go ahead and fix that problem for the guy. Another thing I would recommend for you guys to have is Another thing I would recommend you guys have is a set of lock joint pliers so that you can lock off your brake hoses. So that right there, so we will probably stick in there and clip that guy on just like so. Now do be careful, you don't want to tighten those too much because you can damage the brake hose and then you'll have to replace that as well. So just be aware of that. So since this caliper is seized, we're not even going to worry about retracting the piston and taking it apart before we take it off. So the first step that we're going to do here is we're going to hit these 17 mil bolts, one on top right here, and then one down on the bottom right there, both sides. And then we're going to pry the caliper off with a pry bar. Sorry for the lack of focus here. There we go. There we go. So yeah, we're gonna pry the caliper off. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. These bolts back here are actually going to be 15s, not 17s. You'll also probably find it easier to hit the bottom bolt with a wrench here, just like so. Give yourself some extra leverage. Perfect. This is the one I'm going to want to loosen first, because that one's going to be a pain in the butt. Can't really get a socket or a tool in there. I'm sure you guys heard that. That's his latest obsession. The coworker, ladies and gentlemen. This is what I deal with every day. Go ahead and speed this up for you guys. I'll bring you guys back once I have the caliper off. So we now have our mounting bolts out. Real quick, before we actually take the caliper off, what we're going to want to do is you're going to want to crack and loosen the axle mounting bolts. You can go ahead and take them out, but don't actually pull the bolt out just yet. Now, to get these bolts out, you're going to want either an air tool or a heavy-duty electric. These are torque to yield bolts, ladies and gentlemen. So when you do this job, anytime you take these bolts out, you need to replace them. They are one-time torque only. Make sure you're torquing them to specifications. Those specs I will get for you in just a second. So the specs for these bolts are going to be torque to 35 foot-pounds. That's 47 Newton meters. I don't use that measurement, so I don't even know if I pronounced that right, but hey. And then stage 2, you're going to, after 35 pounds, you're going to give it another 70-degree turn, and that's your torque. So now with the bolts undone but not pulled out, we are free to pry the caliper off, and then we'll take the bolts out, and this hub assembly is going to come out. Now, one thing you want to be aware of is you're going to want to have some padding down here, because the entire axle shaft is going to slide out, and you are going to lose a tiny bit of diff fluid in the process, and it's going to drip down onto the floor. So you just want to make sure you've got covering to catch that, and then something to set the fluid covered axle on, so that you don't get any dirt or contaminants all over that, and then stick it back in. Alright, so our next step is we're going to disengage your parking brake cable. Now, what I like to do is I'll take like a screwdriver or a little pry bar and we'll stick it up in here and leverage, and then you can just wiggle that guy down and around and it'll come right off. Alright, so now with our caliper free, now we can take our cable and just kind of wiggle it out of that slot. It's just going to kind of slide through there. So we'll take that out, and then you're going to want, where am I at here? Sorry. You're going to want a 10 mil to go ahead and take this nut off, and remember to have your hose clamped down so you don't piss fluid out everywhere. You are going to drip a little bit though, so again, patting on the ground to make sure you don't make a mess. So scratch that, ladies and gentlemen. It's early this morning and I have not had my energy drink yet. That's an 11 mil, not a 10 mil. I knew this and I'm just not awake yet. Alright guys, so we got our caliper off. Excellent. Something I want to point out to you guys. There we go. Come on, focus. 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 Nail it. There you go. Right there. Alright. So you guys are going to have 2 old washers. One here, one here. Now when you get your new calipers, you are going to get new washers. The correct way to do this is to replace these new washers with the new ones. But what I want to make you aware of is that with these new washers, if you do not torque these down to the specific specs, which I do not have on hand, unfortunately. I could go look them up, but I'm not exactly sure which spec it's going to be. I'll be frank with you. So, if you do not torque them to the spec, then they will not you will not crush them properly, and you will get leaks. So what we're going to do here is we're going to reuse the old ones, since they're not in that bad of condition. The vehicle doesn't even have that. The vehicle's only got 30,000 miles on it. So it's kind of a miracle that this caliper is defective and binding up like this as it stands. But it is what it is. So we're just going to go ahead and reuse these washers. Just something to keep an eye on. Now, with your new caliper, what you're going to want to do to figure out which side is which, obviously, is the only thing you're going to want to pay attention to is you want the bleeder on the top, obviously. Otherwise, it won't bleed right. And it may not even go together right. So, line it up how it's supposed to go. Make sure bleeder's on top. Correct side. Our next step here is to take out our axle bolts. Come on. And we're going to be removing the axle shaft. So, what you're going to want to do here is upper body strength is going to be the win. You're going to grab it and just pull. You might have to yank a couple of times, but it shouldn't be too hard to pull this guy out of there. So one good yank and you can see that we've pulled it out. It came out relatively easily. As I said, you are going to drip a little bit. It's not going to be too much. So with that, we're going to slide that out, and then you're going to rotate the rotor. You might have to wiggle it, lift the rotor, twist it. You're going to line it up, and the rotor's going to slide off. New one's going to go on. Axle goes back in. New bolts in. Torque them to the specs that I provided to you earlier. Then you put your new caliper on, and then you just rinse and repeat on the other side, ladies and gentlemen. So, I mean, at this point, I'll show you when it's back together. But I think that's going to be it for this guide video. Sorry. So one last thing before we put it back together. When you all do go put this axle in, you're going to want to lift it from the inside and kind of wiggle it in. You're going to feel it. You're going to feel it click in there when it's all the way in. So you're going to want to make sure you feel for that. It'll be a nice solid click, and it'll move probably like another inch or two. So just make sure you're positive that you've gotten the axle all the way in there. Can't just stick it straight in. You are going to have to wiggle and try and lift the back end a little bit inside the shaft so that it'll fit in the hole and slide in. So if you guys got your handy dandy Loctite on you, you're going to take that and your caliper mounting bolts, and you're going to spread it a tiny little bit along the top of the bolts here. So just to emphasize, tiny little bit goes a long way. Absolutely. And this is going to help your caliper bolts just stay threaded in there. Occasionally you can have the mishap where you torque them down and they still come loose. I've seen it happen. So this just is an extra step that you can take to prevent that, but it is not required. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I do got to clean up this a little bit, but that's actually not really going to matter. What I brought you back is for the final step. Let's talk about the break-in procedure that you guys are going to need to do to accurately break in the pads and the rotors. Since this is a heavy-duty vehicle, you're going to want to do it. You're going to want to go a little farther with it than your normal break-in procedure. So, normally I would recommend getting the vehicle up to about 40 to 45 miles an hour and slamming on the brakes, doing a nice hard stop. Do that 3 times, and that's for a normal vehicle. With this guy, you're going to get some grinding for the first little while, and that's going to be all this heavy-duty paint on here. That's all that is rust protect. So that is going to grind a little bit when you first start to drive it after you do the job. I'm going to recommend the same thing, about 45 miles an hour, a nice hard stop. But I'm going to recommend you do it about 5 to 8 times. So, and that's gonna help break in the pads and the rotor. And then after that, you just want to drive it around and make sure you're not hearing any kind of grinding coming from the back anymore. And if you're not, then you are good to go. With that, guys, this has been Lord Smash Garage. How to replace the calipers and the rotors on a 2017 Ford 150 Transit. I hope this guide helped you. Peace. Last thing here, guys. Let's talk about the bleeding procedure here real quick. You're gonna pop off your little rubber. I believe that's either a 10 or 11 mil nut. You're gonna crack that loose and just leave it. You want to let it gravity bleed for anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. And what you're looking for is a steady stream of fluid coming out the hole. And you don't want to see any bubbles coming out. I'd recommend you sit there when you're ready to make sure it's done. I'd recommend you watch it for maybe a minute or two, confirm no bubbles are coming out, then close her up, pump your pedal, and you're good to go. And you want to do that for both sides before you pump the pedal. Also, I feel like this goes without saying, but make sure you're keeping an eye on the fluid in your reservoir in the engine bay. You don't want that running low, because then you're going to get air in there and you got to bleed the whole system.